Hey everyone, this is Jeremy with Humble Organics, and in this video we're going to talk about pruning your tomatoes. So if you're growing tomatoes at home, one of the most important decisions you're going to need to make is, first of all, whether or not to prune your tomato plants at all, and if you decide to prune your tomato plants, how much to prune them. This is one of the most hotly debated topics among tomato growers, and you tend to have people in one camp or the other. Prune everything or prune nothing. So in this video we're going to talk about the benefits and also the drawbacks of pruning, and then we're going to talk about the specific strategy that we've developed here at Humble Organics for pruning that we think really helps us maximize the yield from our tomato plants. Before we get into all that though, I want to just zoom in on a plant here so I can show you the part of the plant that we're actually talking about removing when we say that we're going to prune the tomato plant. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of these plants back here and I'll show you. Alright, so here you can see the main stem of this tomato plant, and you can see the horizontal branches that are coming off the plant, and then at a 45-degree angle between a horizontal branch and the main stem you see these suckers. Okay, this is the part of the plant that we're talking about removing when pruning. And so this is a pretty good size to remove. You could let it grow a little bit longer and then remove it, but it's really easy to do. All you need to do is you don't even need a tool, just grab it and pinch it off. Alright, so now that we've seen a sucker, I want to talk about why you would want to remove suckers or not from your tomato plants. So first thing I want to do is clear up a misconception, and this comes I think from the fact that we call these things suckers. A common misconception is that these suckers just zap energy from the plant and so you should definitely remove them. That is not the case. So each one of those suckers, if you let it grow, will grow into another main stem that will produce fruit eventually. Okay, so they're not just zapping energy from the plant, they're creating more green growth, and then they're potentially producing more tomatoes as well. So with that in mind, let's talk about the benefits to pruning and some of the drawbacks to pruning. So the main benefits to pruning are, number one, that you might get tomatoes earlier in the season. So if you prune your plants heavily, so I mean, as an example, the sort of most severe pruning strategy would be to remove every single one of those suckers that grow throughout the season so that you only have one main stem of your plant. So the benefits to that are that you might get fruit earlier than the season. Okay, we're not talking months earlier, but maybe a week or two. If you prune to, say, a single stem, you might get earlier fruit. You might get larger fruit. Okay, so each one of those fruits the plant produces may be larger if you prune. Now again, this doesn't mean that you're going to turn a small fruited variety of tomato into some huge tomato, right? Genetics is going to be the main determinant of how large your tomatoes get. But for the same plant left unpruned or pruned, you might get slightly larger tomatoes on the heavily pruned plant. The other thing that pruning does is it opens up the foliage canopy. Tomatoes suffer from a lot of diseases, many of which are soil-borne fungi, so things like early blight, septoria leaf spot. They spread easily when you have really dense foliage, especially if that foliage gets wet. Okay, so by pruning the plant a lot, you increase the exposure to the sun, and that can have some benefits for disease prevention as well. So those are some of the reasons that gardeners would prune their plants. Now, what are the drawbacks? Well, for me, the biggest drawback, and for the people that are in that camp that say you should never prune, every time you prune off a sucker, you're pruning off potential future fruits, right? Because that sucker will eventually produce flowers that will produce fruits. So overall, an unpruned plant will typically have a higher yield over the course of the growing season than a pruned plant. Now, drawbacks, the fruit might come a little bit later. Okay, so as we said before, if you prune heavily, you might get earlier fruit. Each fruit might be a little bit smaller. So you're going to get more of them, but each fruit might be a little bit smaller. The other kind of practical drawback of pruning is that, as you can see, tomatoes are huge vining plants, and they grow really fast when they get going, and so to keep up with pruning is actually quite a bit of effort if you have a decent number of plants. We have, I think, 15 plants back here, and when they're really growing at a fast clip, you know, you have to go in every few days and pull out all those suckers, and so yes, it can be labor intensive. The other thing is that the plants can get pretty unruly, so I'm about to spend quite a bit of time tying up branches and trying to support this plant, or all these plants here, because I've let a lot of the suckers grow. And so it is labor intensive, and you have to have some method to support your plants that will handle all of the sort of extra stems you're going to have. Whereas if you prune, say, to a single stem or two stems, you could just tie everything to a single post and be done with it. So those are some of the drawbacks of pruning. So with all that said, which is best? Should you prune? Should you not prune? Well, at Umber Organics, we're firm believers in compromise. Right? And so, like many things in life, I think the answer actually lies somewhere on the middle, and it's different for different gardeners in different regions of the country. Right? So the method that we use, what we call strategic pruning, is to keep in mind the length of the season and sort of what our goals are for the season. All right, so let me lay out the details for the strategic pruning strategy that we've developed here at Umber Organics. And this really works for us. I hope it helps you in your gardening as well. So the first thing is, I don't want to prune down to one or two or only a few stems, because I want as much fruit as I can get from my plants. So early in the season, I pretty much let suckers grow. Now, occasionally I will prune out a sucker, for example, if it's just growing in an area of dense foliage and it's not going to get enough sunlight or something like that, or if the plant is getting really dense and I'm worried about, you know, spreading disease, I might prune out a few suckers that way. But for the most part, beginning of the season, I just let the plant do its thing. Now, knowing the way that our growing season unfolds here in Colorado, starting in about early October, the weather starts getting iffy. Okay, technically our first frost date is usually around October 15th, but even before that, the weather is getting pretty cool, particularly at night, and tomatoes don't ripen. You don't tend to get high quality fruit from plants if nights are cold. So knowing all that, I set October 1st as my target date, and it takes about, from going from having a flower to having a fruit that's ready to eat, could be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so knowing that, I'm going to take my target date of October 1st and I'm going to count backwards about 8 weeks. So here in Colorado, we're talking, you know, late July, early August is the time that I'm going to start pruning my plants severely. Okay, so around that time, early August, I'm going to pretty much pull off every sucker, right? And so I do that because I know that those suckers are most likely not going to be able to produce viable fruit by early October. And if they do, it's probably not going to be high quality fruit anyway. Okay, so by pruning the plant at that point, I'm letting it put more energy into ripening the fruit already on the plant so that it comes out, you know, late September rather than earlier in October when it's going to be colder. And so what this method does is it really gives us the best of both worlds. So we get all the benefits of not pruning our plants early in the season, but then we're very strategic about when we're going to start pruning our plants. Okay, so if I just let those plants go rampant, even in August, they're going to be putting a lot of energy into growing these suckers and initiating new flowers and fruit for fruit that's really not going to make it anyway. Okay, so again, our target date in Colorado is October 1st, and then we're going to count back 8 weeks from that. Your target date may be different, right? If your first frost isn't until November 1st and it stays pretty warm, right? So that's going to then you're going to move it back a little bit. So you're going to need to figure out for yourself what that target date is, and then move back about 8 weeks from that, start aggressively pruning at that point. And we find that this really maximizes the highest yield of high quality fruit in our garden. So I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you want to learn more about growing heirloom tomatoes, please visit us at humbleorganics.com, and we have a specific post actually on, it's called Growing Heirloom, or How to Grow Heirloom Tomatoes. So check that out. Lots of great tips in there for growing heirloom tomatoes at home. So enjoy your gardening.